He wore a crown of gold and commanded armies that stretched across a war-torn France. His word could decide the fate of thousands. Yet behind the royal mask of power, Charles VI of France lived in terror not of assassins or enemy blades, but of himself. He believed that one wrong move, one accidental touch, could shatter his body like fragile glass. This is not legend nor fiction whispered in medieval taverns. This is a true story, preserved in chronicles that paint a portrait of a monarch slowly losing his grip on reality. Charles came to the throne as a symbol of hope, a young ruler meant to heal a fractured nation ravaged by war. But as the years passed, his mind betrayed him. Moments of violent rage, sudden lapses where he forgot his own name, nights where his fear of breaking left him frozen and trembling in his chambers. These became the legacy of his reign. History remembers many mad kings, but few stories are as haunting as this. A ruler who should have been unshakable, yet lived convinced of his own fragility. A sovereign whose madness left a nation vulnerable to ruin. This is the tragic tale of Charles VI, the king made of glass. Charles VI was born into a kingdom that was already bleeding. France in the late 14th century was fractured by the 100 Years' War with England, battered by famine, disease, and endless political intrigue. Yet, when the boy Charles was born to King Charles V and Queen Joanna of Bourbon, the court whispered that he would be the savior of the Valois dynasty, the child who would mend a broken nation and lead France to glory. From his earliest years, the young prince was surrounded by splendor and danger in equal measure. The royal palace glittered with gold and silk, but its corridors were thick with whispers, lies, and the scent of poison. Charles learned quickly that in a royal court, every smile could hide betrayal. Every toast could be a death sentence. Servants vanished overnight without explanation. Noblemen fell mysteriously ill after banquets. The boy grew up under the shadow of fear, his innocent gaze already scanning faces for threats before he could even read the prayers written for him. At just 11 years old, Charles was crowned King of France following his father's death. Too young to rule alone, he was surrounded by powerful uncles and advisors who fought over influence, treating the child king as a pawn on their political chessboard. Amid the chaos, France needed a steady hand, a ruler with vision and courage. What it got instead was a boy forced to mature in an atmosphere of suspicion and bloodshed, where power came with a price tag written in fear. This was the foundation of Charles VI's future reign. Even before madness claimed him, his life was carved by paranoia, betrayal, and violence. A crown meant to be his salvation was already beginning to feel like a cage, one that no child could escape from unscarred. At first, the whispers of instability around the young king were dismissed as stress, the burden of a crown placed on fragile shoulders. But as Charles grew older, the shadows in his mind began to take shape, and the entire kingdom would witness what true madness looked like when it sat upon a throne. The first terrifying episode came in 1392, during a military campaign meant to restore order in Brittany. The king rode with his knights under the scorching sun when, without warning, something inside him broke. He suddenly turned on his own men, eyes wild with fury, striking down loyal knights as if they were assassins sent to murder him. Witnesses wrote of the king foaming at the mouth, screaming incoherently, swinging his sword at anyone within reach. By the time his attendants subdued him, several men lay dead, not by enemy blades, but by their ruler's own hand. After that day, Charles was never the same. Fits of rage alternated with long stretches of emptiness, where he would sit silent for hours, staring at walls, seemingly forgetting not just his duties, but his very identity. Some days, he refused to be called king, claiming he was a simple peasant. Other times, he didn't recognize his wife, his children, or his closest advisors. The royal court learned to tread lightly. Fear replaced respect. Decisions that once required the king's command were quietly taken over by his uncles and counselors, while the monarch wandered between moments of lucidity and deep, consuming madness. France, desperate for strong leadership, was instead ruled by chaos, a chaos that would only grow darker in the years to come. As the years passed, Charles VI's madness took a form that startled even those accustomed to his unpredictable fits of rage. The king developed a terrifying belief. His body was made of glass. Court chroniclers wrote of nights where Charles refused to move, frozen in his chambers for hours, whispering to attendants that one wrong touch, one careless gesture, would cause him to shatter into 1,000 pieces. He ordered special clothing to be made, reinforced with iron and padded with thick layers of cloth. Convinced this would protect his fragile body from breaking, he refused to allow anyone to approach too closely. Even his own family was forbidden to touch him. Advisors spoke to him from a distance, afraid not only of his delusions but of his sudden violent outbursts should he believe someone threatened his glass-like form. On some days, Charles would pace the halls muttering prayers for protection, his hands trembling as he clutched relics and holy charms, hoping they would strengthen his brittle frame. On others, he simply sat in silence, stiff as a statue, terrified that the slightest movement would be his end. Servants were instructed to move slowly, to avoid sudden noises, lest the king believe he had cracked or been struck by an invisible enemy. Whispers spread through the court. Some mocked him quietly. Others feared a curse had settled on the crown itself. Politicians seized the opportunity, pushing their own agendas while the king hid behind walls of imagined fragility. France was left leaderless, its monarch consumed by fear not of war or betrayal this time, but of his own body betraying him in the most absurd, heartbreaking way imaginable. A king convinced he was nothing more than fragile glass. While Charles VI locked himself away in fear, convinced of his glass-like fragility, France itself began to fracture. A king who could not rule left a throne vulnerable to hungry wolves. Powerful dukes and royal uncles fought fiercely for control of the realm, each claiming to act in the king's name, but serving their own ambitions. What began as whispers of rivalry turned into open conflict, a civil war between two factions that would plunge the kingdom into bloodshed: the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. The court became a battlefield of intrigue. Alliances shifted like sand, betrayal was currency, and the king lost in delusions was nothing more than a pawn on a board he no longer understood. Every decree issued under his seal was another play in a game for dominance, while the true monarch wandered halls in terror of his own shadow. England watched with patient eyes. The once united enemy they had fought in the 100 Years' War was now tearing itself apart. Exploiting the chaos, English forces struck with precision, seizing territories that France could no longer defend. The nation Charles was destined to save crumbled under foreign boots, burned by internal hatred, and silenced by a king too broken to lead. What should have been a golden reign of unity and strength became a dark age of fear and civil war. Charles VI's madness did not just shatter his mind, it shattered his country, leaving a kingdom divided, betrayed, and vulnerable to the world beyond its borders. By the final decade of his life, Charles VI was king in name only. The man who once rode into battle and inspired hope in a wounded nation had vanished, replaced by a shadow wandering dim corridors, trapped in a maze of delusions and fear. Days passed where he spoke to no one, locked in his chambers, lost in hallucinations and paranoia. Other days, he wandered barefoot through the palace, muttering prayers or staring blankly as though the walls whispered secrets only he could hear. Real power rested in the hands of his wife, Queen Isabeau, and competing factions of advisors who carved up France for their own gain. The country bled from endless civil war and foreign invasions, while its ruler faded into silence, too broken to fight for his crown or his people. In 1422, Charles VI died at the age of 53, his body worn down by years of mental torment. He left behind a shattered France, divided by hatred, weakened by foreign occupation, and haunted by the memory of a king who lived in terror of himself. History would remember him not as a savior of the Valois dynasty, but as Charles the Mad, the monarch whose mind fractured an empire long before his enemies could. Centuries have passed since Charles VI sat on the throne of France, yet his story lingers like a haunting echo through history. Kings and emperors are often remembered for their conquests, their victories, their empires built from blood and ambition. But Charles is remembered for something far more fragile, a mind that broke under the crushing weight of power. His reign stands as a grim reminder of how deeply a ruler's madness can scar a nation. The legend of the Glass King became more than a tale of one man's delusion. It became a symbol of fear, a warning about the dangers of unchecked power in the hands of someone who cannot control himself. Historians debate whether Charles suffered from severe psychosis, bipolar disorder, or a hereditary illness passed down through generations of royal bloodlines. But no diagnosis can explain the devastation left behind. A kingdom divided, a war prolonged, thousands of lives lost because the man meant to lead them lived imprisoned by his own mind. The court chronicles tell us that France's enemies did not break the nation. Its own crown did. In the end, it wasn't a sword, an army, or a foreign king that shattered France. It was the fragile, tortured mind of Charles VI, the monarch who believed he was made of glass.